The council meeting will come to order. If you would please rise to give your attention to Councilman Harmon for the invocation, remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Your Honor. Will you join me in a moment of silence? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag proclamations this evening. The first is for Drug Endangered Children Awareness Month, and I ask Jennifer Gassman of the Kansas Children's Service League to come up and join me. I have here a proclamation that I will read. Whereas drug endangered children are at a higher risk for abuse and neglect, and whereas it is estimated that more than 79,000 Kansas children live in homes where alcohol or other drugs are abused, and it is estimated that over 4,000 Kansas infants are born prematurely exposed to substitutes every year, whereas children whose parents or caregivers who use drugs are at a higher risk to use drugs themselves, and whereas all parents need to receive information about the effects that drugs and other substances have on their unborn babies, and that children and on their judgment and parenting abilities, and whereas those in need of treatment who are either pregnant or already have children have a right to treatment options that support their role as a parent and take into consideration their children's needs in the process. And whereas the statewide Kansas Alliance for Drug Endangered Children, along with the Shawnee County Alliance for Drug Endangered Children, invite all residents of the city of Topeka to participate in Drug Endangered Children Awareness Day. Now therefore I, Larry Walgass, Mayor of the city of Topeka, do hereby proclaim the day of Wednesday, April 22, 2015 as Drug Endangered Children Awareness Day. If you would like to make some comments.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the Topeka City Council members for supporting local efforts to identify and protect Shawnee County children living in drug-endangered environments. Drug-exposed children impact our community in a number of ways, from the negative impact of medical, emotional, and educational problems these children often face, as well as the increased incidence of abuse and neglect in homes where substances are abused. The Shawnee County Alliance works to raise awareness of the problem, as well as programs to help families receive help with substance abuse and parenting. As part of Drug Endangered Child Awareness Day, we did hold a 5K race this past weekend on April 18th at Heartland Park to raise awareness and funds for additional training for professionals in the community, and we had 150 participants registrations. I would just like to ask, and we have some members of the Shawnee County Alliance, if they could stand and be recognized.
Second is the Child Abuse Prevention Month with Brooke Miller, Director, Early Childhood Initiatives. Thank you for joining me. Proclamation here. Whereas children are key to the state's future success, prosperity, and quality of life, and whereas children have a right to be safe and to be provided an opportunity to thrive, learn, and grow, and whereas child abuse and neglect can be prevented by supporting and strengthening Kansas families, thus preventing the far-reaching effects of maltreatment, providing the opportunity for children to develop healthy, trusting family needs, and whereas we must come together as partners so that the voices of our children are heard by all, and we are, as a community, extending a helping hand to children and families, and whereas by providing safe, stable, and nurturing relationships for our children, free of violence, abuse, and neglect, we can ensure that Kansas children will grow to their full potential in the next as the next generation of leaders. Now therefore, I, Larry Wolgast, Mayor of the City of Topeka, do hereby proclaim April 2015 as Child Abuse Prevention Month.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all the Topeka City Council members, and to our many partners out here in the audience that really work tirelessly in our community to improve the lives of children and families. United Way of Greater Topeka and the Successful Connection programs partners with the Kansas Children's Service League and the Kansas Children's Cabinet and many other local agencies to provide strategic and much-needed services to reduce the prevalence of child abuse and neglect within the Topeka and Shawnee County. We know that adverse childhood experiences have significant and long-lasting negative impact on the lives of children, which follow them into adulthood and into their future generations. This is an issue that affects not only those who suffer from abuse and neglect, but to every citizen who lives and works in our community and pays taxes. We know that by living and working united, we can create positive, sustainable change in our community. Thank you very much.
We've had two. Thank you. We've had two on children, and now we have a special one we have every year, and that's Recognizing Law Day. I think Jim Rankin, the president of the Topeka Bar Association, is here, and I know you have a few cohorts with you. And we all know this is a special year for Law Day.
Yes, it is.
It's 800.
Yes.
We have a proclamation where we mention that. Whereas Law Day 2015 celebrates the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, whereas Magna Carta is a symbol of the rule of constitutional law and served as a foundation for many of the basic rights Americans enjoy today, including due process, habeas corpus, trial by jury, and the right to travel. Whereas this year's Law Day theme, Magna Carta, symbol of freedom under law, calls on every American to reflect on the importance of Magna Carta and to continue to dedicate ourselves to enhancing the rule of constitutional law, whereas Law Day has been named an annual observance since President Dwight Eisenhower established it in 1958. Now therefore, I, Larry Wolgast, Mayor of Topeka, do hereby proclaim May 1, 2015 as Law Day. I call upon the people of Topeka to acknowledge the importance of our court and judicial system, and celebrate Law Day 2015.
Well, yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, Manager Colson. We have several members of the Topeka Bar here with us, and I'd like to ask all of them to stand. We're particularly honored that we have with us the Honorable Evelyn Wilson and the Honorable Frank Yeoman of the Shawnee County District Court. I won't name everybody that's here, but I do certainly appreciate the lawyers that have come. And this was established in 1958 by President Eisenhower, partly as a response for the May Day celebrations that were taking place on the other side of the world when our country was threatened by a form of government and a way of thinking about the law that was completely foreign to ours. And our tradition relates back these 800 years and beyond that, in fact, to the ancient constitution of the English-speaking people. And so it's a great opportunity and a matter of great importance to all of us in the legal profession that this be remembered by our governing body here in Topeka, by the governor's office. And so we thank you very much for this opportunity and your proclamation. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, we will be continuing. There are no presentations this evening, so we will proceed with the roll call.
Mayor Wolgast.
Here.
Council members Hiller. Here. Clear.
Here.
Ortiz. Here. Shum,
Here.
De La Isla,
Here.
Jensen,
Here.
Schwartz, Cohen, and Harmon.
Councilman Cohen informed me that he had a business engagement that he had been agreed to prior to the election, and it would be impossible for him to not meet that obligation, so he is not here this evening. I believe we have no additions or deletions to the agenda, council members, and there is no executive session scheduled, so we will proceed with the consent agenda.
A is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Michelle De La Isla granting Boss Hogs an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seek concerning noise prohibitions. B is a resolution introduced by Deputy Mayor Karen Hiller granting Cumulus Broadcasting an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-170 concerning noise prohibitions. C is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear granting Sacred Heart St. Joseph Parish an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seek concerning noise prohibitions. D is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear granting Sacred Heart St. Joseph Parish an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-150 at seek concerning noise prohibitions. E is a resolution introduced by Councilmember Sandra Clear approving a special event known as the Sacred Heart St. Joseph Parish German Fest 2015. F are minutes of the regular meeting of April 14, 2015. G are applications. There's a list of open after midnight license applications, and staff is recommending approval.
Okay, that is the consent agenda for the evening. Council, your pleasure. Councilman Harmon.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd move to approve the consent agenda as read.
It's been moved. Councilwoman De La Isla seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the consent agenda is approved as read. We will proceed with the action items then. Item 5A.
A is a revised petition, a revised project budget in the amount of $779,500, and a resolution of advisability and authorization introduced by City Manager Jim Colson, authorizing improvement project T401039, which will provide for sanitary sewer installation to Kansas Education Science Park as more specifically described therein, and rescinding resolution number 8486.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask Mr. Whitaker to step forward and provide information on this item and answer any questions that this body may have.
Okay, Mr. Whitaker.
Good evening, Your Honor, Council. Let me just pull something up here. Okay. What we're bringing forward tonight is a revised petition and project budget as read for the sanitary sewer project for the Kansas Education Science Park, and that area that it serves is the area kind of shaded in purple, or whatever that color is. There on the map is what it serves. The original resolution was approved back in July of 2013 for an amount of $696,800. And the developers used a petition, so that you understand the petition process for the city to construct these infrastructure improvements, and the costs are to be paid 100% by the landowners over a 10-year period. The project is currently under construction, the sewer project is, and is about 95% done. When they discovered in the original plans, which this was the old sewer line that went with the old facility there, and it's about 20 foot deep. It was supposed to have been an 8-inch sewer line. It turned out to only be a 5. So our minimum is 8-inch, and then when you're building these type of facilities, you need to make sure you've got the right size sewer line. Unfortunately, where it had to tie in, it needed to run under McVicker. Well, that kind of was negative from about 5 years ago. McVicker was rebuilt. You've got sidewalks, retaining walls. So they looked at an alternative. It's called pipe bursting, which is more money, but actually it just goes through and bursts the pipe and puts a new pipe in under without having to do any excavation. And so that is the reason for the increase of about $82,700, which gives us a revised project budget of $779,500. And within your packet, both it's USD 501 and Stormont Vale that are the two landowners that are affected by this petition, and both of them have signed this and agreed to the terms for the additional money to complete this project for them. So staff is recommending approval, and so I can take any
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you for the presentations. Are there questions for Mr. Whitaker? Councilwoman Ortiz?
You said Stormont? What is Stormont?
Stormont has some land in the front portion towards McVicker. They actually own some of that, and then 501 owns the rest of the area in that shaded area. So they have actually a lot that they plan on developing in the future.
Stormont does?
Stormont does, yes.
Okay, because I knew 501 did, but I was
Yeah.
surprised to hear you say Stormont.
And I think they've broken ground on that facility there. I can't say exactly what its purpose is. Councilwoman Hiller, in your
That's their
district?
new orthopedics
That's right.
center. They're pulling
That's
everybody
right.
together.
Okay, all right. Now, are there other questions for Mr. Whitaker? Seeing none, your pleasure. Mrs. Hiller?
Move to approve.
It's been moved to approve. Ms. Del Isla seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the revised petition, budget, and resolution are approved. We will proceed to item 5B, expenditures.
B is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Jim Colson allowing and approving city expenditures for the period of January 31 through February 27, 2015, and enumerating said expenditures therein.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This approval would authorize city expenditures in the amount of $17,732,940.78.
Okay, and these are for the month of February. Council members, Councilwoman Ortiz moves to approve. Councilwoman Schwartz seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the ordinance is approved. Item 5C,
C is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Jim Colson allowing and approving city expenditures for the period of February 28 through March 27, 2015, and enumerating said expenditures therein.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This authorization for city expenditures in the amount of $15,371,682.99.
Okay, and similarly for the month of March. Ms. Ortiz moves, Ms. Del Isla seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the ordinance is approved. We then proceed to the non-action items. 6A, the clerk would read.
A is a discussion of the city's financial review, forecast, and budget process.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to ask Brandon Kaufman and Nikki Lee to step forward. They're going to provide this financial review and really a kickoff of the budget process as we initiate that activity.
Okay, we're looking forward to this, starting a budget process.
Good evening,
Mr.
Mayor.
Kaufman.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Like I said, tonight we have kind of the review of the 2014 year end. We're still getting those unaudited numbers, but we have a better updated number for you tonight, the financial forecast, and then really to kick off the budget. We kind of went through some of this last year, but I think it's important for us to talk about where we've been. So where have we been? Well, we just went through a great recession. That resulted in $11.2 trillion in market losses, $8 trillion housing bubble, loss of 6.1% of payroll employees, and consumer confidence dropped from 95.2 to 25.3. So we don't live in a bubble here. All of that impacted the city of Topeka and our finances. If you look at the unemployment rate, it peaked at 10% in 2010. As of 2015, I think of February, we're at 4.8%, which is a really good rate. If you look back at a 25-year average, we were sitting about 5.2, so we're at 4.8. So we have great news there. Median household income is still down from 2008. However, we are starting to see movement upwards. It bottomed in 2011, and I believe it's up 5% since 2011. So we continue to see good news there. Total non-farm employment for the city in 2008 was 111,400 compared to 2014, 112,200. So we're continuing to see movement with the economy and good news, which also impact city finances. So some of the important lessons that we learned of that was the extreme job loss. We saw that in the city of Topeka, especially the impacts on median income, and also the continued sluggish recovery. I think this is going to be a continual effort to just continue that recovery, and it's going to impact us for a long time, especially in our housing sector. If you look at our three main revenues for the general fund, they're all economically sensitive. We have ad valorem taxes, which are basically based off the market values of homes. We have sales tax, which is based on consumer spending patterns. And then we also have franchise fees, which is affected by multiple areas. That can go up and down. They're a little bit harder to predict because of weather, economic activity. There's rate setting approvals, boards for those. And then also price of such things as natural gas drive those. So where are we now? In 2015, we hit the 15% mark that the city manager set when he came in. That's a great target that we hit. We did that through ongoing expenditure management, so the departments have really tried to manage their budgets and hold down the expenditures. Another addition that when we came in last year, we implemented a formal revenue projection process. Basically, these three revenues that we're talking about make up 79% of the revenues for the general fund. So we tried to get better at doing that. With property taxes, we went and met with the county appraiser and have got estimated values for 2016 that we're going to share tonight. Sales tax, we went back and looked at the growth over the last 10 years, and we've also looked at the various sectors that make up the most important part of the sales tax. In franchise fees, we're watching those trends on a monthly basis and seeing where they're impacting us. Our debt burden has decreased, and I'll share a figure with you here in a bit on that. Our debt rating has been upgraded on the general obligation side. And one of the great things that I don't think we've talked about there publicly with S&P, they have a management rating, and S&P has rated the city of Topeka the highest score for the management rating. So that's a great area of impact that we have direct control over. That makes up 20% of our rating. We've improved our reporting processes with quarterly, monthly reporting, our annual report. We won the CAFR award this year for Government Finance Officers Association, along with the budget award this year too. So we're improving our transparency. We've improved the budget process. And then also, as part of that, one thing that we wanted to talk about tonight is something new for citizens, which is the open budget portal. So at this point, I was going to ask Sherry Schoonover to come up and share the open budget portal with you.
Thank you, Brandon. Honorable Mayor, honorable council members. As Brandon said, one of the things that we're always trying to improve is transparency and how can we present the information to our constituents better. The budget book currently is a PDF document, what's about 200 pages, that talks about funds. And for citizens, a lot of them, it doesn't mean very much. So what we elected to do is we put together a portal that actually presents the operating and the capital improvement project. We have loaded so far 2014 and 2015, and once 2016 is approved, it goes there as well. Now the difference on this one in here, because it's not based on funding, it's based on services. So you would be able to see, how much money is actually spent for specific service, public safety, neighborhood, public works, utilities. Then from there, you're going to be able to drill down to how much money is spent on services. And you actually can bring it down into each expenditure level. It also shows you of where the money is coming from, the different funds, special revenues or enterprise funds or anything of that sort. It will show you where it is, what it is for, and also shows you the trend over the years. So in most departments, you're going to notice it's going to be pretty flat. But you're going to be able to see if there's an increase or not, and it's a lot easier and visually appealing. So on one side, you're going to have the operating budget, what allows you to kind of bring it down to an accounting level, or how much money is spent for contracts, how much money is spent for, personnel. On the other side, you're also going to have the capital improvement. On a capital improvement, or CIP, it is loaded currently 2015. So what you're going to be able to see there, and you can drill down into multiple levels, that how much money is being spent for streets. You're going to be able to see of what it is for, where it is from, and where it is going. It actually can show the council districts and how much money is being spent and provided and how many projects. So if you are an individual that rather looks at numbers, you can actually also draw down to the raw data itself. And then you can select it from there of how you want to see it. The goal is that a lot of those financial and operational information going to be provided in this format so anybody can look at it in any shape, form they want. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. Are there questions for Sherry? Councilman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sherry, I just want to make sure that we track hits and any comments that people that get on our websites and have any indication about whether this is better or worse or whatever?
Yeah, we track how many hits we have and what areas they requesting information on and what areas to go to.
So if people are having difficulty with trying to there's a lot of information up there.
Yeah.
Tracking it, they can get further assistance.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one of the things we're going to be doing as well is we're going to put a training video together in a training document that allows us to walk through exactly what each piece is. And then we're also going to offer some sessions. This will be released to the public, shortly. There's a few little tweaks that we still need to do and making sure. And we want the training material available for anybody that is interested in seeing that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you state your title?
I'm the Deputy IT Director.
Okay, so for newer people, yes, Councilman Jensen.
I have to say I'm a computer guy, and this is impressive. This is excellent work. I appreciate it. I can't wait to see this in the public's hands and what their reaction is. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brenda?
I'm sorry. Mrs. Hiller, did you have a comment earlier?
A question. At one point, we were working on getting the financial reports themselves on a similar platform. They actually were, but the idea was at least the council would be able to get into them. How are we doing on that? And I just haven't asked in a long time, so.
We're actually working on an upgrade at this point in time.
Yeah.
And we should be able to have something what is a little more user-friendly by the end of this year, because the system that we currently have, you kind of have to know the parameters. So it's going to be a lot easier. And the other thing is too, this platform that I have just showed, we're also going to be using that to present the information. So it's going to be a lot easier to maneuver around. So that's the goal, and we're going to have a lot of those things available by the end of the year.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
We'll continue with the budget report.
So I think the point there is we continue to try to be more transparent and have more open government through any means possible. Outstanding debt, so it's hard to see in this graph, but we've decreased our debt over the past 5 years by $37.3 million. So our debt is down 10% from 5 years ago as of the end of 2014. For year-end 2014, like I said before, these are still unaudited results. We are going through the audit process right now, so they're still subject to change. However, we believe that they're pretty firm numbers at this point in time. If you look at our ending fund balance as of the end of 2014, we're looking at about 17.58%. That's basically occurred through ongoing expenditure management, and we've also seen revenues over actuals, over budgeted estimates. So now I want to get into some of the three main areas and really of revenue and what makes up those. One of the biggest areas that I mentioned before was property taxes. So how do we get to that property tax number? Well, it's driven off of the market values and basically assessed valuation. So there's three components of assessed valuation. You have real property, which is basically your rooftops, residential, commercial, industrial, land. You have personal property, which is more of equipment, mobile home, leaseholds, aircraft. And then you also have state assessed utilities. These utilities are assessed by the state. The county has no control over how those are valued. Those include things like the railroads, pipelines, which go all across our city and county. So this is just a brief look back. So if you look at the total assessed valuation of those three categories since 2005, and this is primarily due to state law changes, we've seen a decrease in personal property from 11 to 2%. So basically that equipment that was being taxed before is no longer being taxed, and we're going to continue to see that drop off the books as we move forward. And basically more of that's going to be shifted over to real property or residential rooftops as the personal property category erodes over time due to taxation and state law changes. So if you look at our property tax assessed valuation, we're estimating a little over $1 billion, 41 million for 2016, or a 2% growth. That purple there is the percent change, and then the green is the total assessed valuation. So you can see it's been up and down through the years. In 2014, there was a spike, and that was primarily because of security benefit coming back on the tax rolls from a IRB exemption tax abatement. We're seeing a similar circumstance in 2016 with Blue Cross Blue Shield, that they had some of their buildings off the tax rolls due to an abatement. So they're coming back on the tax rolls in 2016, which is helping to drive that number up to 2%. There are some new ones going forward that we're estimating. I think in 2017, Reesers, some of their improvements are going to come back on the books. So we're going to continue to see that trend as this community got more focused on economic development, that those abatements are coming back onto the tax rolls and helping us moving forward. The little drop there in 2015 was primarily due, like I mentioned before, to personal property changes with the state shifting watercraft to a different taxation method. So real quick, what makes the changes in real property? So that's driven by two things. One is reappraisals of current property, and the second is new construction. So the green bars there are the new construction that we see in this community. We've averaged about 10 million over the past 10 years. So we've estimated 10 million moving forward. For 2013, we're looking at about 13 million in new construction. And then the reappraisals. So you can see the reappraisals over time have primarily been negative. And really what was driving up our values was that new construction. We're estimating moving forward that we're going to start to see a little bit of growth in reappraisals. However, we're still being very conservative in that estimate and still rely on new construction to push up assessed valuation. Sales tax revenues, we're estimating 1% moving forward, or 1% growth. If you look at our 2014 actuals, they came in 700,000 higher than what was budgeted. The last 10 years, we've seen citywide tax growth of 0.88%. In 2014 to 2013 to 14, we saw a growth of 3.81%. Compared to 12 to 13, we saw a 2.39% growth. And then through March of this year, we've seen a 2.96% growth. So those numbers have been continued to increase over time as the economy recovers. We've actually surpassed the 2008 numbers, which marks the first year since 2008 that sales tax collections surpassed 2008. And like I mentioned earlier, we're also going in and analyzing each of the sectors for sales tax. So if you look at the retail sector, We've seen a 2.68% growth over 3 years. Food has grown about 2% over 3 years. Utilities is up 5.12%. Construction is up 5.63%. Or I'm sorry, yes, construction. Communications is up 3.45%. And then also one that I track, it doesn't really, from a dollar value, it doesn't make up as much, but it's an indicator of people's willingness to spend. Arts and entertainment is up 2.02% over 3 years. Franchise tax fees is another important revenue for the general fund. We're estimating 1% growth. In 2013 and 2014 actuals were driven by a couple things. One, weather, and then also the increase in the franchise fee from 5 to 6% for Westar. So the forecast moving forward, we're estimating a current balanced budget with an add to the overall fund balance. So moving above that 20%, moving into 2016. In the out years, it dips a bit, but we'll have to adjust expenditures to correct those in the out years. In addition to that, we wanted to try to focus a little on the other pieces of the budget too in this presentation. So we wanted to cover the utilities and their forecast moving forward. So what we do with the utilities is we're looking at a reserve is what we call working capital. That's basically your unrestricted revenues that you have available for one, rate stabilization, two, emergencies, and then also for any weather fluctuations that might impact your bottom line for the utilities. We're working off of a recommended 90-day baseline. That recommendation comes from Government Finance Officers Association for enterprise funds like the utilities. So in the forecast moving forward, and this is really based off the operations, the current debt, expected future debt, and then also capital needs, we're looking at declining values in available working capital. So you all have made tough decisions for rates for 15, 16, 17. However, I think the message here is that moving forward, you might have to revisit that discussion. However, it may be a year or two down the line. Stormwater working capital. This fund primarily has utilized cash for projects. Moving forward, we'll have to start take on a little bit more debt. We haven't had any rate discussions in this fund. However, maybe in 3 to 4 years, there might have to be some discussions on that based on the amount of capital projects to maintain our levee systems throughout the city. Wastewater working capital, once again, that baseline is 90 days. This is, again, forecasted off of growth in operations, debt, and capital needs. You can see we're fluctuating right around 70. This is another one that you set rates for 15, 16, 17. However, moving into forward, there might have to be discussions about rates in the future. With that, at this point, I can stand for any questions, or we can turn it over to Nikki Lee to talk about the 2016 going forward, budget going forward.
I would like to comment back on page 8, which is the percent of the total assessed valuation. And just to point out for people to be aware, this is a shift we see going on within our state in that the legislature is taking a number of items off of the personal property area. Particularly the big was machinery in plants. And you can see that now in 05, 79% of the assessed valuation was based on the real property. Today is 87%. So it is really the homeowners, the businesses that are absorbing, paying proportionately more in for the assessed valuation, and proportionately more in taxes. And the legislature continues to look at more exemptions. And as each of those, they've looked at several more this year, and as that occurs, that shift will continue. And it is something that I know as the municipalities and counties work very hard to try to educate the legislators to the effects this is causing, because cities and counties will have to increase their mill levy to offset the loss we're receiving from those. Just a editorial comment. Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this? Thank you very much. This is very helpful.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Nikki Lee, Budget Manager. Just a few more slides here. That segues very well into continuing our conversations about the 2016 budget. As was mentioned before, in most of our major revenues, we are projecting some growth, but it's very modest still. We want to be very conservative. So we just talked about the assessed valuation and then the 1% sales tax growth. We are expecting to see some rising expenditures for some of our fixed costs. So for example, employee costs, things like benefits, things like merit, things like that will have to be addressed with the next budget. Also electricity and gas, those are areas that if rates are increased in any of these areas, we also see increased expenditures. And also cash for projects. This is reflective of the CIP that was just approved, included some dollars for spending cash on items instead of bonding it. So really it's a good story, but we do have to build that cash into our expenditures for that next year's budget. So once you receive the proposed budget in June, you'll see how all of this translates to dollars, but just wanted to start to prepare you for some of the themes that you'll be seeing. And also something that we really wanted to state is that we'll be using existing resources and we'll reallocate them to address council priorities without having to raise the mill levy. This is a reminder here of what the budget priority process needs to look like. It is a council rule that budget priorities for that upcoming year must be adopted by council by the third meeting in May, so that's May 19th this year. So we are wanting to continue a conversation. There was a meeting in January where we started to talk about this with the council members, and then we followed up with one-on-one meetings throughout the last couple of months. So tonight, if anybody wanted to continue the discussion about the budget priorities, we can do that. However, if you aren't ready to talk about them tonight, there will be an agenda item on May 12th specifically just to talk about budget priorities. So we'll spend the whole time talking just on this item, with the vote on the budget priorities being May 19th. So I wanted to show you up here, really budget priorities in the past have been pretty broad. Up here are the 4 that were adopted last year in alphabetical order. And then below that, I went ahead and posted, since we've been having these continuing conversations, some council members have taken the opportunity to submit some recommended priorities for 16. So a few of those are represented here. As you can see, a few of them are the same as they had been in prior years, but a few of them are adjusted slightly, specifically the one about fiscal sustainability, focusing on reducing debt rather than building the general fund balance, and then also improve performance and cost effectiveness. We can come back to that if you'd like, or we can stop here for a minute.
Are there any questions or comments at this point? I think we'll go ahead.
Okay, and so really wanted to wrap up with you all with the tentative budget calendar. This is also reflected on the city's website so the public can see these dates. In addition, this presentation will be available online for you to look at or for anyone in the public to look at. So on this calendar, this represents really everything we've done in the year thus far already related to budget. And as you can see, starting in May, we'll be kicking off some of our public engagement events. And as always, there will be opportunities to engage in person, but also some kind of online element, so you'll be receiving details there. And then there's also any significant council meetings, so the one related to the budget priorities and also the vote on budget priorities is related on this calendar. Also, budget committee meetings. We really spend the month of June working through the proposed budget, which you'll receive about that second week of June. So that's really when we'll spend most of the time really digging into it. Those tentative dates are on this calendar here, with really everything about the budget being wrapped up by about mid-July. That concludes the presentation.
And council members, particularly those who haven't been through this before, look at those budget committee meeting dates and look at your calendars and see if you have difficulties with those. Let us know right away. because we really want to get everyone in attendance, or as much as possible. Everybody has conflicts, but we like to have, as particularly going through it the first time, it's really helpful to go through those budget committee meetings, a Saturday, a Wednesday, and a Tuesday night when there is no council meeting. Questions, comments, additions? Councilwoman Del Isla.
Thank you, Mayor Wolgast. I would just like to congratulate the spectacular work that the Budget Department is doing. We've gone from having an audit that stated that our Budget Department was lacking to now all of a sudden having awards and the explanations and how every single time we keep on raising the ante on the level of excellence that is being provided and the clarity on these reports. It is just spectacular. So thank you very much, Mr. Gerber, Mr. Kaufman, and Nikki. Absolutely wonderful work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Other? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kickoff. We're now officially into the season or underway. That is the first discussion item. The second discussion item is for the clerk to read.
B is discussion for the purpose of providing an update on the status of the Heartland Park redevelopment district.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. We are hopeful of this evening having a conversation that allows people to clarify certain issues, to specifically address questions that have been made, but mostly we want to drive dialogue, and we want to ensure that the people on this body who are going to be in a position sometime in the near future of having to vote in favor of moving forward with the sale of the Star bonds on Heartland Park, or to vote against moving forward with the Star bonds, that you feel confident that you have objective, fair, complete, and relevant information so that you can make the most informed decision possible. My staff has been sitting around talking about these issues a lot, and the question got asked yesterday, what is it that we're trying to do? And the answer was simple, and it was unanimous. We want to help you make an informed decision. If a vote is made in favor to proceed, and our recommendation up to this point has been we should, because we think that we are very confident that that is in the long-term best interest of this community, we will proceed to carry out your will. If the decision by this body is made to not proceed, we will likewise proceed in addressing whatever issues need to be addressed from a budget perspective, from the city perspective. So we have done a very good job, I think, and has been talked about, managing the finances of this community. This is just the next step in doing that. This was a problem that can be equated to about $1 million of ad valorem taxes that are charged to City of Topeka residents to address this issue. The solution that was brought forward was to transition that cost from city property tax payers to the state sales tax. And but we are where we're at. 30 years ago, it's been said many times by people who I respect, we shouldn't be in the racing business. Absolutely, we should not be in the racing business. It was never our intent to be in the racing business. Because of the structure of the deal going back a long time, we ended up with to owning the property, but it was tied to some reversionary interest provisions, which got us to where we're at today. It's very complex. There have been a lot of comments made about disingenuous comments, lies, hiding, omissions. It was nothing other than a decision and trying to help us as an organization make the best decision to address a very specific and a very real budget issue equating to $1 million of property tax and an economic engine. So we know that there's a lot of fatigue on this item, and so we've also thought a lot, how do we present this so that it just doesn't become the same old story and it's the Pavlovian response where people just stop listening because they've already heard it. So we hope that this presentation today, which will not be given by me, which is probably the best news, will address the specific issues that have been brought forward, but also we want to stop, take a breath, and ask you if you have any questions or if you're seeking more clarifications as we go forward. So that being the case, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to look to the man to my left. That's you.
Or we can put the slides. Yeah. That might be helpful.
And we planned this.
It's going great so far. And just before we start, and maybe so that we know the process, you're going to make a presentation and have questions, or shall we wait to have questions? Because, if this is a 5-minute or 10-minute or 20-minute, maybe we better go all the way through, and what would you prefer?
Thank you, Mayor.
To make it move along.
Throughout the presentation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ally, but there will be a slide that just says questions, so we can go through a section,
Okay.
we can stop, we can address questions, go through another section, address questions, because we want to be able to present the information to you, but as the city manager said, we also want it to be a discussion and to be able to answer any and all questions that are posed. So we're hoping that we can do that. You'll just see a big slide that says questions, and that's when we can stop and kind of discuss previous slides, and we're more than happy to go back and to discuss anything that we've gone through.
And then at the conclusion of the council members' discussion, then we will have the public comment for those who signed up to speak on the issue. Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, and just to remind people about the larger process, it is the intent to go forward with a couple of town hall meetings next week. We're tentatively thinking about Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, just because that generally works from a schedule perspective, and then bring back a resolution on May 4th for consideration by this body. And I can't say this strong enough. We need this to be your plan. We need this to be a schedule that you're comfortable with and that you feel like you can proceed with.
Mr. Sublette.
Thank you. So I guess we'll move forward with the facts, and I guess the first thing is to talk about the motive. And if we can click to the next. Okay. There's been some disagreement about our approach. That's fair. We recognize, as the city manager has said, we could have done a better job presenting this proposal from the beginning. And it's a complex proposal, and we've done our best to roll that out. Our motive has always been to save Topeka taxpayers from shouldering millions of dollars in debt that's been established. We believe the proposal that's been put forth is a solid one. Post-audit, in addition to us, post-audit also looked at this issue and came back. They had 8 different areas, and they came back and found that we met both the financial and the legal obligations in all 8 of those areas. This will mark our 12th public meeting that we've had on Heartland Park. And in addition to that, we've done 2 live blogs, and I think there's been over 50 different newspaper articles that the city has contributed to in regards to Heartland Park. And the city manager mentioned 2 additional public meetings scheduled hopefully for next Tuesday and next Wednesday. I think the tentative plan is for one of those to be in the evening and one of those to be during the day, so the most people possible can attend those. We continue to believe that this plan is the most viable in order to relieve the taxpayers of the city of Topeka from the tax burden that would have to be carried forward. Our entire motive from the beginning was to be good stewards of taxpayer money. So the question is, there we go, how we got here. Obviously, this is almost a 30-year-old issue for the city. And there's a lot of history, but just to put together a very brief history, in 1988 is when all of this started. That Lario had essentially purchased the ground for Heartland Park, deeded that to the city, and then there were bonds that were issued to construct Heartland Park. And the thought process back in 1988 was, after those bonds were paid off, and I think it was actually there was a 30-year mark in there in 1988, then all of that property would revert back to Lario. I mean, the thought was they're going to invest a lot of money in this park, they're going to get it up and running, so sometime they will get it back. There's been some, and I will get to the reversionary interest and do our best to explain that, but just to be clear, this was not the reversionary interest was not created in 2003 when Jayhawk took this over. It was created in 1988, and then Jayhawk inherited that. So just to clear that up. In 2005, the city provided $5 million for improvements to Heartland Park and secured $10.4 million in STAR bonds. And then in 2007, another $750,000 for reconstruction of the drag strip. I've been here for 2 years and some change, and the city manager is coming up on 3 years, I believe, in August. One of the issues that initially was brought to the city manager's attention and then to my attention after I started was issues with Heartland Park. That there was the imminent threat of foreclosure, bankruptcy was discussed. The city was still on the hook for the outstanding STAR bonds. And so the discussion was, how do we deal with this issue? How do we deal with it moving forward? And there's been numerous discussions of different scenarios publicly about that. And that's when discussions started about how we deal with this. So that's just kind of a brief history of where we were and kind of how we got here. So that's just kind of a brief intro, but if anybody has any questions at this point between Mr. Gerber, Mr. Colson, and myself, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
On these issues, Mr. Shum?
Just to clarify, the 8 to 10 million that we would have outstanding in STAR bonds, that is a creation from 2005's STAR bond issuance, is that correct?
That's correct.
So the 8 to 10 million is not a new obligation that would be created this year. We're still on the hook from the original takeout in 2005, correct?
If we, Councilmember Shun, if we maintain the status quo, it's an indisputable fact that we owe approximately $10.6 million as of today.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Hiller?
If we could go back to your slide, please. Something that's come up time and again, and I just wanted you to confirm it. Back in 1988, when this whole thing started, was that whole process of owning Heartland Park and getting this rolling, was it not voted on by the citizens at that time?
Yes, I believe it was voted on. Yes, it was voted on by the citizens at that time.
The issue of voting has come up, but it was a public vote that got this whole thing started, correct?
There was a yes, there was a public vote approving of the project.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilman Jensen?
Was the public aware of the reversionary interest clause at that time?
I can't answer that question. I was a sophomore in high school.
I was 6, so.
It's no excuse.
As a 6-year-old.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what the ballot question was and what information was in the paper in 1988, but I'd be happy to dig through our archives and see if we could find that information out.
Councilwoman Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You stated you had 11 public meetings. Can you state the date of those? What do you call public meetings?
When I was looking at the public meetings, it was every city council meeting that's been discussed at. It was the public hearing in front of the county. It was I think we had 2, if I'm remembering right, town hall meetings on this. So it's all the city council meetings, the meetings in front of the county commission, and then the town hall meetings.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, was the public able to engage in all those meetings, conversations back and forth, engage in dialogue in those meetings?
In terms of the city council meetings, there's opportunity for public comment. At the county commission meeting, there was opportunity for public comment. At the town hall meetings, there was obviously opportunity for public comment. In the live blogs that were done, there was a lot of back and forth. There were questions asked of city staff. We would respond to those questions. And that doesn't include all of the one-on-one meetings that city staff has had with individuals on the issue. And obviously, in the newspaper articles were questions by either reporters or citizens in responding to those questions.
So those are what you're calling public meetings,
Yeah,
period?
they're meetings open to the public where we discuss
But not
different
necessarily
aspects.
with everybody. Like you just said, I had one-on-one conversations with constituents, so we might not know what that entailed.
Right.
Or you had other dialogue with other entities, and we might not know what that entailed. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I'm not counting that in that number of public meetings that I put forth.
Well, I just heard you list them all. That's why I was asking.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Claire?
As a follow-up to that, 12 public meetings, I'm surprised then that new information is still coming out that no one knows about after 12 public meetings.
I guess I would ask what new information.
Well, like the information in the paper on the $500,000 that might be owed now in property tax or sales tax or.
I'm sorry. I would be happy to address that if you would like me to, Councilwoman. That article that came out Saturday, Doug should probably be the one to answer this, but I'll start. I always get in trouble when I talk about finance issues as the attorney. But when you have a bond issue, you put out a debt service schedule. And what was developed 6 months or so ago was a flat repayment schedule. If we just make the same payments each year, this is what it would look like. And there are different ways to structure that debt. We won't know what the interest is on the bonds until they're sold. And at that time, we'll put together a debt service schedule and a debt service schedule that can be put together to make sure the annual payments meet the debt payments each year. We offered that information to the Topeka Capital Journal. Mr. Gerber had a phone call with Mr. Carpenter offering that information. Ms. Van Dyke emailed him offering that information, and they were not interested in that information.
Yeah, Mr. Gerber, you want to add to that?
If I may add to that as well, what you're referring to specifically on the debt service model is in fact just that. It's a model. As the city manager stated, it was nothing we viewed as controversial, and maybe we should have taken a closer look at it, but we ran the model so that we could look at the overall big picture finances of the district and make sure that we were comfortable that at the end of the district, at the end of 2025, that there would be sufficient revenues to pay off the bonds. That was the intent in running the original model. We looked at it from a big picture perspective. I would suggest that we rarely, if ever, I mean, I've only been here a year, but I've never had a conversation with council about a debt service model. I mean, we just talked about changing up bonds on a project earlier in this meeting, and we didn't particularly talk through the debt service associated with that. It's just something staff typically does. We run scenarios. We can certainly get to that point, but it's just not something we typically do, and so it wasn't part of our thought process with that particular model. Additionally, as the attorney stated, we ran a flat model. We can run models which make our debt service subject to available revenues, so that on a year-by-year look, there's sufficient revenues to pay off the debt service from that year on a year-to-year basis.
Okay, so then when did you realize that wasn't the case? That it wasn't enough? I know this is complex, but then I need to understand. I mean, try and make it uncomplex.
Okay, yeah, city manager, you
Yeah,
want to
thank you,
comment
Mr.
on
Mayor and Councilmember Claire. So I think the more important thing is, while that article, and I don't really weigh in on the accuracy or lack on articles because that's a difficult subject. That article never stated that there wasn't sufficient revenue in the district to pay off the entire debt, though it sounded like it the way the headline was written and the way that it was structured at the beginning. It will still, if you looked at that debt schedule that they worked off of, it showed that at the end of the debt service time, that there was more revenue coming in than was necessary to service the debt. It just focused on that during those first 5 years, there was a gap. Mr. Gerber's point that he's making is what any financial person would make. When you structure your debt service schedule, you structure it to match the revenue. We had never done that because we were just taking a look at the real comprehensive big chunk numbers, knowing that we haven't even sold the bonds yet. And that's why you don't see that sensitivity applied there. And to be honest, we really never did pay attention to it because it wasn't, we knew we had sufficient monies in the district or based on the model. What we didn't do was have that sensitivity on a year-by-year basis. That would have been taken at the time that we marketed and sold the bonds.
Councilman Jensen.
So just so I'm clear, it's the intent of the project then that there would not need to be tax revenue from the mill to pay off those bonds. It would be structured so that it was essentially revenue neutral from that perspective, correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Jensen, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Ortiz.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of Ms. Clear. I never remember hearing a figure for the track improvements until I seen it came out in the paper. I don't remember that it ever in executive session. I don't ever remember, it being brought to us that amount was needed for the track improvements.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Ortiz. As part of the Star Bond legislation, there is a requirement that there is a 50-50 test that's met. We talked about that fairly regularly, that there would need to be improvements to the track to match the test. So once again, I think that there is a tendency that when something hasn't been discussed in detail or discussed in the manner that it's being picked up, that it was being omitted or it was being hidden, and certainly wasn't the intent. Now, I have said, I don't know I could say it any clearer, if I could go back, I would have a totally different communication strategy on this because we really were focused on meeting the financial obligations and the legal obligations, and we feel very confident that we did that. And certainly the legislative post-audit, which evaluated this on eight items, agreed with us. But we always had built into there that you needed to meet the 50-50 test, and we should have talked about it more. We just assumed it was covered based on the legislation itself. It couldn't be approved without that being in there. And it was part of
But not knowing that does look like it was omitted, and you have to understand where we're coming from. You know, when other people say, wow, did you know this, blah, 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 and no, that wasn't a part of the discussion. So, if there's anything else that needs to be brought out that you think, or you foresee that needs to, I think we need to put everything on the table. We really, really do. No matter how big or small, or whether you think we know it or not, because that was a large amount of improvements. And when my constituent said, Sylvia, did you know that? How did you not know that? That was a big number. That's very frustrating. And I understand we're not gonna go back. We need to move forward, and I'm willing to move forward, but I need to know everything, and I need to make sure that it's on the table, not just assume that I know. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Jensen.
The 50-50 match, who is responsible for paying the other side of that? Is that the operator or the city?
Under the RFP that was put out, it would be the operator, and the operators that we entered into discussion and negotiations with all understood that it's $5 million and $1 is how it matches up, and all of the operators understood that that was going to be part of the agreement. And to look at it from a very realistic perspective, I've learned a lot about racing in the last year, and when you look at an outdoor racing facility over the next 11 years, an operator investing $5 million in that facility is not difficult to do. I mean, you have a racetrack, a dirt track, a road course, grandstands, suites, the drag strip, all of those things that are subject to weather and different conditions. $5 million and $1 is not hard to get to that number. And so all of the people we've been in discussions with said clearly we can meet that obligation. That would be the requirement under any contract any operating contract that would be entered into on behalf of the city. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but one of the issues that we had and that has come up is, okay, so what you're asking is we make $5 million worth of improvements to this track over 11 years. One of the mistakes I think we've made in the past is we've just said, you've got to make these improvements in 11 years. So when you get to year 10 and nothing's happened, what do you do? And a discussion, not to get too in-depth into contract negotiations, is one thing we've been consistent about is if this body decides to move forward and we enter into an operating agreement, that there'll be markers along the process, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, to make sure that that investment is taking place so you don't get to year 10 and no investment has been made and you have somebody saying, well, I can take care of it in the next year. That's not how I think we want to do business in the future.
Councilman
Thank you.
Ortiz, yeah. Councilman Ortiz.
And what guarantees do we have that that's going to be done? When I looked at some of the amendments, and I won't discuss them, but what guarantees do we have if they don't do that?
And I think those are things that are going to be built into the contract in terms of and let me just throw out an example, because I think that's the best I can do since I'm not in contract negotiations with anybody right now, is if there's a 4-year lease for the property or a 5-year lease for the property, and after year 1, there's a requirement that you've invested, I'm just picking a number, $750,000 to continue with that lease. You have to have spent that money to continue to be able to lease the property. There could be penalty provisions built into the lease. There's all different ways of enforcement that we haven't looked at before in these operating agreements to be able to enforce that.
And I would hope that we would look at that so that we don't end up in the predicament, if this council does decide, so we don't end up in the predicament that we are in. Because we don't have any guarantees, you know, and I'm looking at this amendment and there's no guarantees in here. So we need to really implement something like that if we're going to continue this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Ortiz, I want to follow up on that. One of the very critical elements of all discussions that we've had as we prepare that we may go into contract negotiations was talking about specific performance measurements, not just in terms of the investment of the $5 million, but to make sure that the track is being used in a manner consistent with what our expectations were. And so we share that, and we believe that it's absolutely vital that you have specific performance measurements, that you have the right to cure those, and penalties if those aren't achieved, including losing the ability to run and manage the track if you're not able to live up to those obligations. I think the mistake that has been made in the past was not to have any sort of teeth to address those things if there was a lack of performance.
All right, we're ready to move on. We're down to page 2 of our documents here, of our.
I don't know.
And we have to give Ally a break, because this is her first time running it, so.
I don't know what to do with this.
Oh, I'm
so-
sorry, did you?
Excellent.
While we're waiting, there was a question I didn't see, so I'll recognize Councilman De La Isla.
Thank you, Mayor Wolgast. This question, if possible, for Mr. Gerber, City Manager. I know that we're talking about a possible $10 million, $14 million owed, should there be no course of action taken towards those bonds. How much have we paid on those bonds to date?
Councilmember De La Isla, those star bonds from 2006, how much have we paid? That's actually coming in a slide, but we can go ahead and preview that. And we have from 2006 through 14, we've paid $5.5 million. 2.6 million of that has come from state sales tax revenue, and 2.9 has been supplemented through property taxes.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, very rarely does the information that you're working through actually make your argument before, but what you're seeing in the debt service schedule from the previous Heartland Park is it started with a much lower payment, and then it built up over time. And one of the reasons that this year was so critical is we jumped up from about $500,000 in obligation to about a $1.2 million payment there. So it actually was structured to build up as the tax rates increase.
Like your mortgage balloons
Yeah.
at a certain point. Right, all right, now, ready to go on, phase two.
Good evening, council. This is actually a slide I'm going to address, and this is a slide you will see a number of times throughout the presentation. So I'm going to hang out on this slide a little bit right now. Further on in the presentation, we'll come back to it and refer to it. But I think this slide accurately addresses the message we want to portray. There's a lot of noise about this issue, and it's legitimate, good questions. But when it comes down to it, there's really only a couple paths in the future. Okay, the first scenario really is that we issue star bonds. And we believe that through our analysis, the Topeka taxpayers, if we issue approximately $5 million in new star bonds, will be on the hook through property taxes for $0 moving forward. The second scenario is that we don't. And that scenario, you see a range up there of between 8.2 and 10.6 million. That's because there's really two sub-scenarios under scenario 2, as it were. The first is we don't, and activity at the park continues the way it is now. So someone buys the track from Jayhawk and they continue operating. We continue to get approximately $200,000 in sales tax revenues to offset our bond payments. So that makes our the net amount we owe about 8.2 million. If we don't issue star bonds and the track goes dark for a period of time, indefinitely perhaps, then again, referring back to a statement I made earlier, we know for a fact that we owe 10.6 million. It's a little less than that, but you'll find me tonight talking in round numbers. I'm glad to talk very specifics down to the cent if you want, but I think it's easier for everybody if we talk in very round numbers. So it's a little less than 10.6 million, 10.585, but 10.6 will do for our discussion, I think. So those are really the two scenarios, 1 and then 2A and 2B that we have facing us. The question gets asked, and I'm sure is continued to be asked, the question the council might have is, how did we come up with these numbers? Again, I'll refer you back to something that was said previously in the meeting, but we've done it through internal analysis. We've done it through working with various partners in getting us data information, whether it's the State Department of Revenue, whether it's our financial advisors who are here tonight. They've helped frame our analysis for us. It's appropriate and important to continue to remind folks that this data has been reviewed by two separate entities. One, a CPA firm, and the second, legislative post-audit. And both groups, neither group has skin in the game. They just analyze it from an unbiased, neutral perspective. Both groups pronounced all of our financial reasoning very reasonable and found that our conclusions and our some of the forecasting we put into the model were all very reasonable. And so, again, it's been viewed by two separate groups who looked at it with an impartial eye. And the last thing I'd say, referring back to something that was said earlier, is S&P, our bond rating agency for general obligation bonds, has given us the highest possible rating for financial management. That's not because we're a bunch of clowns. It's because they respect the background of Mr. Colson, of myself, of Mr. Kaufman, of Ms. Lee. They respect the financial policies we have in place. They've conducted a series of interviews with us. They know the policies we're doing. They know what we're trying to implement, and they respect what we're doing. They understand that we have a good, strong financial management background. So the numbers are good. The estimates we've made, the forecasts we've made are reasonable based on the information we know at the time. And we're confident to stand behind those numbers. I think the last thing I would say before we move on from this slide, Ally, is that I think we might take just a little bit of time here and hang out and discuss how exactly a star bond works and what a sales tax increment is, just as kind of a review for the some of the council and maybe a refresher for some of the new members of the council. STAR stands for sales tax revenue, so it's their bond revenues that come from sales tax. And the way the increment works, you'll hear us talk about that a lot tonight. The increment is you pick a base year. In our case, the base year is 2005 because that's when the original Star Bond District was established. So you figure out the revenues from that base year. Let's say they're $1 million. They're not. I can give you the exact number. It's more like 4.4 million, but just for easy math, we'll say $1 million. And then you pick your increment year. So let's say 2013, 14. Let's say that the revenue in that year was $2 million. The increment between the base year and year X, in this case, is $1 million. So that $1 million increment, or the $1 million difference, is what the city receives to assist in paying off the bonds. So just, again, kind of a brief overview of that process and how it works. Again, I can give you specific numbers. We know for a fact in 2005, the total revenues of our base year were 4.4 million. We know that in 2013, they were 5.7 million, so that increment is 1.3 million. So we know that, as we've talked about, the district is expanding. I think we're ready to move on to the next slide.
And hopefully this will be a quick slide. We talked about kind of where we've been, so want to talk a little bit about where we are today. And Mr. Gerber just covered a lot of the existing Star Bond that we know that we owe somewhere between $8 and $10 million in Star Bonds based on the 2005 issuance. So I want to talk a little bit about the Heartland Park property. So if we can move to the next slide. On the left is what is the existing Star Bond District. So if you go down Southwest Topeka Boulevard, you run into Heartland Park. So on the left, that was the Star Bond District that was established when the Star Bonds were issued in 2005. As you can see, it's a relatively small district that incorporates only essentially Heartland Park. And so when we talk about what's been generated over the last, since the Star Bonds were issued, that's the district we're talking about. So the city gains state sales tax revenues in that district. If you look on the right, that is the proposed amended district that goes north from Heartland Park, so it's Southwest Topeka Boulevard to Troy, if I'm not mistaken. It incorporates all the businesses, all those entities along that district. So as you can see, the city stands to take in a significantly expanded portion of state sales tax in the amended district. And in all honesty, I know there are lots of considerations and lots of complexities, but at the end of the day, the interest, I believe, of this body and of the taxpayers of the city is this amended district. That's what enables us to pay off our Star Bonds. That's the revenue generator for us moving forward to generate sales tax.
We've actually already run through this slide. We anticipated we might get a question about this, so yay for staff for that anticipation. But this slide shows what we talked about previously, that to date on the last Star Bond, the 2006 Star Bond issuance, we paid $5.5 million. That's come from two sources. First is the Star Bond proceeds itself of $2.6 million, and then it's been offset by property taxes to a tune of $2.9 million over that time period.
So I guess, do we have any questions about the last 2 or 3 slides that we've gone through?
Yes. Councilman Shum.
We talked about the budget earlier, and one of the concerns expressed about the budget was with the changes from the legislature on taxation, that we might be looking at property tax increases through a mill levy, which of course would result in less money in the city of Topeka's pockets. Is 1% conservative enough if we're taking taxes with one hand in order to keep the city afloat and expecting people to still have extra money to spend on items for sales tax.
Councilmember, if I understand your question correctly, is our 1% growth scenario enough, conservative enough, or should it be less than that?
That is my question, based on the way things are being taxed in the state now. If the city's looking to potentially make up tax revenue through a mill levy, then that means that our citizens have less money to spend. If the citizens have less money to spend, we cut back on things that we buy, which is where I'm concerned about the sales tax.
So I would give you a couple different ways to answer that. First off, I want to make sure you heard correctly earlier that there's no anticipation of raising the mill levy with the 2016 budget. Staff goes into the budget thinking that's not going to happen, and
Sure.
of course, it's the council's will, but that's the budget we plan to present will be flat for sure. The numbers will be what they are in the end, and so our projections are just that. I mean, we're giving our best guess. I would reiterate that a couple different independent bodies have looked at it and pronounced it reasonable. But more than that, I would say that we've just come through the worst recession since the Great Depression. And citywide, the average sales tax growth has been 1% over that time frame. And so with all those factors in play, we believe it's reasonable and conservative enough, yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Jensen?
Some of my constituents have concerns that if even one or two of the businesses in that district were to close, that it would impact the district significantly, and they're concerned that the Starbond district is not large enough. I'm just passing those concerns on. Have you looked at scenarios where something like Ed Bozart would close or move out of the district, one of the major players in that position, and if so, what would happen at that point? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Jensen, so when we were having these conversations, building the schedules for both revenue and debt service, I can guarantee you that the Cabinet Secretary and I had some very interesting conversations where I was trying to make that district as big as I could. I was kind of hoping to make it to include all of the Wanamaker corridor also. So there's no benefit to the city in overestimating the tax value. We wanted to make as strong of a case as we possibly could to make that district bigger. We got it. We actually tried to get it further up Kansas Avenue. We tried to take in Mr. Briggs' car dealerships also. That didn't work. So we thought about it. We were not able to do so.
If something like that were to happen, would we have the opportunity to redraw those boundaries given a significant change in the tax revenue they would produce?
We could, this is an amendment of a current Starbond plan, so there could always be continuing conversations with the Department of Commerce.
Okay.
In order to do that, there would be a new Starbond amendment. We would start this process over and move forward. There's no guarantees of the way that.
Well, but that's essentially what I was
yeah.
getting at. If something happens, can we react to it and fix it as opposed to, oh, well, we're just going to have to get property taxes to make up the difference?
Yeah, again, I don't want to assume what the Department of Commerce would do, but we could approach whoever it is with the Department of Commerce to look at amending it again. I think one thing that's important to know, what's been put in the paper, and I think some of the constituent questions have been Ed Bozarth, that seems to be the focus. And from what I understand, he's been there a little over 40 years in that area. And what was brought up was, well, what if he threatens to move someplace else in Topeka out of the district? Well, he's going to have to pay property taxes whenever he moves in the city of Topeka, and he's going to have to invest significant dollars in moving that facility. So is it a possibility? Sure, it's a possibility. But when we look at the revenue generators in that district, I think we're comfortable that they've been established businesses for quite a number of years within this community.
Thank you. I'll be happy to pass that information along.
Mr. Gerber, you want to comment on that?
I might also add that in addition to everything that's been said, the district is expanding, so we're taking on new revenue by its very nature. So even if a player in that new revenue goes out, there's still more revenue than we're taking in now. So it should be a net to the city.
Councilwoman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of want to follow up on those same questions, and I swear I didn't tell him to ask that question, because I had asked Jim that earlier about what happens if the car dealership happens to move. But I heard you say earlier that the Star bonds are going to take care of the entire debt, which is about $15 million. And there will not be any other city funds used to make up the debt that is owed on Heartland Park. That is a comment. I thought I heard Sylvia or Sandra ask that question about, that the Star bond, there is not going to be any city revenue used to pay off Heartland Park, which will be about $10 million that we owe and another $5 million that we're expanding. So $15 million, the Star Bond District will pay for it. We won't have a repeat of what we have right now from 2006.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Schwartz, yes is the short answer to that. Based on what we know now, we believe that there will be sufficient revenues generated from the expanded Star Bond District to pay off the new and existing debt service through those revenues.
Follow up on that. I was reading in the Star Bond requirements that the state has, that the Department of Commerce has, there's something every 7 years that an audit is done. Is that something that we did not go through or will go through with the Star bonds this time or not? And I can tell you the page number on the internet. I mean, I can look at it and ask you to look into it further. So.
That's been done, and we do have that. So it has been
So the
accomplished
audit
per
has been
statute.
performed at 7 years after the Star bonds were issued.
I don't know the date, but I know we have an audit.
Okay. And that audit then, 7 years from now, would clearly define if there are any shortages so that we don't get into this, owing another $10 million.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councilmember Schwartz. We'll know that a whole lot earlier than that. I think the difference between what we're trying to do today and what's been done in the past is, we're fighting hard for the best position for the city, given a very challenging starting point, and I think we have in place some management practices that have not existed in the past.
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I'm sorry, Councilman Hiller.
If I could ask you to go back in sequence to 2 slides. The one that has the 2.9 million in it, yes, that one. Would, again, in round numbers as you're using, would it be reasonable to say then that the city has been spending roughly $300,000 a year to subsidize these payments for the last roughly 10 years?
Councilmember Hiller, if you averaged it out, yes.
Roughly?
Of course, it's going to vary by year.
Okay. So then going back to the slide that has the 0 and the 8.2 million, that would mean then that if we do the Star bonds in 2015, back to Councilman Shum's question, we would actually then be making a net contribution of $300,000 a year to make it available for the city's operating budget. Money that in the past 10 years we've been spending on Heartland Park would be available for other expenses.
That money then, Councilmember Hiller, would not then be needed in the debt service fund, yes.
Correct. So it would be available for other uses. Thank you.
Councilman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Elaine asked the question that somebody else asked, the city will not have to pay for anything, and you answered yes, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. What if the track loses money? Then will the city have to pay?
Well, I'll give you a 2-part answer. Those projections are based on what we know now, which is an operational track and an operational track moving forward. But that can be offset by the fact that the district is expanding, and so there will be those additional revenues to offset potential losses from the track. Would they offset one for one?
So if
I can't
the
answer
track
that.
loses money, you know, and that's what worries me. Just like don't we have the tracks scheduled for May the 22nd through the 24th of this year, just tentatively? Isn't that graduation week? And we always get it on graduation week, where people are not going to the track, but they're actually going to be with their families or in and out of town. We've had a couple instances where Ray has lost money. We had the one when the bad storm came through and they were set up camp out there and they had a tornado, and we had one year where it was just that one Sunday that they could only race because it was another bad storm and tornado came through. But several years we've had, and I know the National Hot Rod Association has said, we won't come do another graduation weekend. When the track loses money, who's responsible to pay that?
Councilman, I'm sorry, or city manager.
You can have my
We'll trade.
We can.
I recognize the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Ortiz, that really is one of the long-term challenges of this race, is that it has not only fallen on weekends that were busy for other people. This year's Memorial Day weekend, and there's a couple of other races around the country, so that was a concern. We've talked at great length to NHRA about moving the event to the fall where weather's more predictable here and there's been rain. And I don't want to overstate this, but the success or failure of what the city's doing from a Star Bond perspective is less dependent on the race and the operations of Heartland Park itself as it is to the district, the expanded district. Now, obviously, a successful race and the successful sales tax that's generated there is important to us, and that's where we've been getting most of the money that we've been getting up to this point. So, but it's the larger district that's really going to ensure that we have financial capabilities to address the debt concerns going forward. To say this simply, I think that we can probably feel comfortable we'll get at least as what we've been getting in the past, and with a new operator and more investments and more activity out there, we should do better. The net benefit is going to be the increased district and the revenue that's going to come through that, if that answers the question.
I don't think it does. If
Okay.
the races fail, we will be obligated to pay for whatever
No.
the money they lose. Is that correct?
No, thank you for clarifying that. Under the NHRA contract, the previous operator had that guarantee, which was included in the contract. That contract language is being removed from the NHRA contract based on our conversations today. But the race going, the losses at the racetrack going forward will have no impact on the city at all. When we did the RFP, we were very clear that the city had no financial responsibilities for the success or failure of operations going forward.
Okay, my next question is, have we seen any of the track financials to see how much that they've lost from year to year? Have we seen that? Do we know?
We have not seen those financials from Jayhawk, but I would pose this clarification in that we've essentially built our model on the fact that the track isn't being successful. I mean, we're basing growth out of that district on the previous years from the track, where you're saying it's not being successful. And so moving forward, we've been very conservative, thinking that the track isn't being successful, and we based our model on that. Additionally, I would say that the track can lose money for the operator, but still generate sales tax. Those are kind of two separate things, if that makes sense. So it could not make enough money for the operator, or that the operator wants, but it would still generate sales tax in terms of concessions or ticket sales or associated costs. And so it would still generate Star Bond revenue for the district. Does that make sense?
No, but, okay. I just kind of feel that somewhere we're gonna come back and pay that loss. That is generated, if it's generated, because to me, there's not a guarantee. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilman Ortiz. We will not. There is no consideration that we would ever enter into any agreement or allow an agreement to go forward that would have us obligated for any losses at the track.
If I may, then how would we know that if we haven't seen the losses from the National Hot Rock Association or the track? If we haven't seen any of their assets, or not their assets, but any of their revenues, or you know, what they bring in or what they've done?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Ortiz, we are not a party to that. We are not an obligated party. Under the agreement, under the previous agreement, Mr. Irwin had an obligation, Jayhawk Racing had an obligation to the NHRA, which he dealt with. That's what we all were aware of last year with the challenges. Under the agreements contemplated to go forward, and under the RFP that was projected and the conversations that we've had with the potential operator, the city has no obligations to NHRA, to the track, to anything. We are really just a transition agent to get the new operator in place, and we just focus on the sales tax. We have no obligations anywhere else.
But Jim, didn't we have to write that check to Mr. Irwin to get them to come back because he didn't fulfill his obligations? Because he took a loss?
Sorry. Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Ortiz, absolutely. And that is the old day, and that was the hole we found ourselves in, and the importance back last June of trying to maintain the relationship with NHRA. That was a one-off situation. Previously, however Jayhawk Racing dealt with it, it was their obligation to deal with any losses that happened for the purposes of maintaining the relationship with NHRA and maintaining the value of selling this facility. That is the reason that we took a very unusual step to pay that debt to NHRA on behalf of Jayhawk Racing to keep NHRA in the fold for this year. It was not a normal business operation.
I have some more questions, but I will
Okay.
leave for right now.
Councilman Shem.